People who endorse the idea of belief can open the door to dogmatism.
I think people really do have some kind of need to just believe.
Yes.
I mean, if it's not God, it's we create idols, we create gods.
Do you need belief in your epistemology?
People have said to me, the only reason you pretend not to believe in God is because you want to engage in homosexual activities. Do you think they're moral facts? Is the short answer.
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
Moving us in a good direction.
Brett, question me.
You and I have spoken a lot about what we disagree about, but in fact, I think we agree far more than we disagree.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
Obviously, exploring the agreements isn't always the most interesting thing, especially for anyone watching the conversation, or even for us.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at the epistemology and how we come at reasoning differently, because often we reach the same conclusions about the importance of the Enlightenment, the importance of the West, or let's say atheism as well. I want to know from you, let's begin, how confident are you that God doesn't exist?
When you say God, what do you mean? Like, what? Like, do you mean like
The traditional, let's say, Christian...
that I'm
God.
extremely confident about. But if you want to say a first cause or an unmoved mover...
No, the supernatural wielder of miracles,
Yeah,
part of the ocean, part of the sea.
Yeah, so I'm extremely confident that that's all nonsense.
Okay, so I'm with you that God doesn't exist, but I wouldn't say I'm extremely confident. And the reason is that if it comes down to a mere matter of feelings, then we're at odds. After all, what would you say to a person who says to you, they're extremely confident that God does exist?
Why? That's what I'd say. I mean, it comes down to, look, there's really, I've spent years reading the arguments for this, looking at the quote-unquote evidence for this. It comes down to some version of Plantinga's God sensor. Like, some people sense it, some people don't. There's really no reason for believing any of it, ultimately. I mean, beyond a communal reason, there's no epistemic reason for believing it, or there's no reason based in, there's no justification for those assumptions.
Yeah.
But I become less confident the more you say, well, could there be something outside the natural world? I don't think there could be, almost by definition. But maybe there's some, depends how you define it, some realm we don't have access to, some, I don't know, some kind of four-dimensional end space. I honestly don't know, but that's usually not what people are talking about when they refer to the supernatural.
When you ask your interlocutor who is a theist, why? I think that's the most crucial question.
Correct.
Because it makes their claim about confidence utterly irrelevant. No matter how confident they are, that has no bearing on the validity of their argument.
That's correct.
And so in the same way, I would say you don't need confidence that there is no God. You just say there is no God. Confident or not, it's a bad explanation.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I never say that.
Uh-huh.
So what I say and how I define it in my first book and what I've written about is that I don't think that there is sufficient evidence for a God or gods, but if I were given that evidence, I would believe. There's a big difference. The only person I know who ever definitively stated there was no God, the only reputable person I respect is Victor Stenger.
Yes, I've read his books as well.
Yeah, he's amazing, was amazing.
What evidence would persuade you, therefore, that there is a God?
It's a great question. So I've also answered that, but I think that the best way to answer that question, and I don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I think that the best way to answer that question is in the negative. So I think the best way to do is what would not persuade me. No empirical evidence would persuade me. In other words, you can't point to a configuration of stones in Israel 10,000 years, or whatever, X number of years ago, 2,000, whatever, and say, aha, 2,400 years ago. Yeah.
In other words, it's not a matter of evidence for you. No evidence could persuade you.
It's not a matter of, it's also not a matter of observation. So there would be no evidence because by definition, the thing stands outside of evidence.
Yes.
So you can't use evidence to get something that stands outside of evidence. So we'll just take a detour and I'll just give you my answer. So if it's not evidence, what would it be? It would be a reason. And the best apologists know that. William Lane Craig knows that. The best apologists know that they will convince people through reason. It's also not some internal state. So a reasoned argument. I asked Dawkins, I think our first or second event, what would convince him? And he said something about the letters in pi spelling out a message. It's not the fine-tuning argument, the universe is fine-tuned to us. None of that. It would have to be a rational, reasoned argument. And that's why the Kalam cosmological argument was the big thing. It was the big thing. That's the argument that people use who believe in this stuff. That's the one that they believe is the most persuasive to people. I mean, I think it's nonsense. It's been debunked thousands of times. But anyway, that's what it would take for me to calibrate my confidence, is a really good reason.
Hey, did you know only half of you watching are subscribed? If you're enjoying the content, hit the subscribe button to keep the videos coming. Thanks.
On any of these questions, I always like to ask, what problem are you trying to solve of, for example, the God hypothesis? So for someone who is otherwise scientifically rational, but wants to put the Kalam cosmological argument or something like that, what problem are you trying to solve? Now, purportedly, they're trying to solve the origin of the universe, the origin of everything.
Yeah.
But as you and I both know, that only pushes the explanation one level up.
Correct.
So instead of saying, well, we don't have an explanation for the entirety of reality, therefore let's postulate this God, who by definition has no explanation. Well, you may as well say the same thing about the universe.
So what explanation is that trying to solve? I think for them, it's the old why is there something rather than nothing? I think that's one question. I think it's a question of a weird kind of specious reasoning. We know abortion is wrong, but if there was no God, abortion wouldn't be wrong. Therefore, we know that there has to be a God because we know abortion is wrong. So they're positing it. The explanation is that they're trying to solve is how we know there's morality. We have these moral impulses that can't be based on nothing. We couldn't possibly just be accidents rotating around a star. What is the why of life? Why are we here? What is our purpose? So I think that there are many questions that these, I don't know what's the best, I'm trying to think of a very generous way to state it, that believers have.
Believers is a good thing. I wasn't going to go down this route, but it seems like a good opportunity. Now, the religious people will say that if you deny the existence of the all-benevolent God, the omnipotent, all-powerful Christian deity, that you therefore have no moral foundation. There's no way you can be a moral realist without extracting it from the eternal book. So what is your response to...
Yeah, that's been answered. I will say on a couple of... I think you'll like this. People have said to me, the only reason you pretend not to believe in God is because you want to engage in homosexual activities. Travis is dying over there. But I've heard that twice. I've heard that people with a straight face have looked at me and said that.
Takes one to know one?
Yeah, but I didn't say that. I just said, well, that's not actually true. Okay, so, I think Harris does a good job of that, the moral landscape, and explaining that. And it's not without its problems, because it kind of smuggles in the is audit, kind of futzes with that a little bit. But I think you can rationally derive... Well, first of all, I could be completely wrong about this, that there are moral facts. I think there are moral facts, but if I'm wrong about it, that doesn't have any bearing on whether or not there's a God or not, right? And then that's the other thing, is that presupposes a kind of God, a directionality of the God, like the God actually cares what you do. Who's it? Alistair McIntyre said, how do you know God wants you to do what God wants you to do? So you have this idea that, it's the problem that goes back to the Euthyphro about piety. Is it just because the gods love it, or the gods love it because it's just? So I think you can rationally derive moral truths. I could be wrong about that, but that's independent. Just from empirical reality and from reasoning. But you do have to smuggle in some assumptions, basically suffering is wrong, and then you have to kind of have a moral triage within that, a nested moral triage within those assumptions.
So you would take suffering as wrong as axiomatic, rather than...
No, I would it's even tricky, because you can think of counterexamples. You don't want to increase the overall suffering in the world. It's kind of a negative utilitarian calculus, right? You want to try to maximize human flourishing. maximize well-being. It's not just, I'm not a consequentialist, although I have some of that in my thinking, but I do think that I have a strong deontological strain. There are rights, there are responsibilities that we have. There are certain ways we ought to treat people and that we ought not to treat people. We ought not to impede upon someone's dignity. And I don't think, just parenthetically, but important to note, I don't think that attacking an idea impedes upon someone's dignity. You know, people think, well, it's a part of my identity, you can't talk about it, or you can't. I just think that's just nonsense. That's an affectation that's been stitched together in a kind of weird Frankensteinian way to create a moral beast as it walks through the world. So, yeah, but I could certainly be wrong about that, but that doesn't change the fact that I genuinely do not believe there's sufficient evidence to warrant belief in a God or gods. But again, if I were given that evidence, I would believe.
I'm trying to find out if you have a need for a moral foundation. Do you feel psychologically compelled that unless you begin with some axiom, like Harris does, for example, he wants to defend moral realism on the basis that the worst possible misery for everyone is the wrong state of affairs and you want to move away from that. And from that he says, well, therefore you can have a science of morality. You could begin scanning the brains of people in some distant future in order to figure out what is maximal human flourishing, and so therefore it brings morality within science. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, it's funny. I was at a conference. I was at what are those things called? Not a conference, but an event. And a woman started crying on stage. And I texted Sam. It was like, this woman's crying. She says, you're a utilitarian. How terrible is this? I mean, people get like really upset about this stuff, like just super upset about it, like to a degree that I never would. I did an event, Reed and I did an event with Michael Schellenberger and Michael Shermer, and both of whom are very good friends of mine. And Schellenberger is a Christian, and he said to me in that, yeah, there are only about 4 or 5 people who can live without God, and you're one of them. Oh, and I know, what did he say, Reed? He was like, I know all of them, and 2 of them are right in front of me. me or 3 of them, me, Sherman, and Reed, right in front of him. But I don't know. I just don't have that psychosocial need. I just don't have, I mean, I couldn't care less. I wouldn't possibly live my life anywhere different unless it was, I mean, if I were really convinced, then I think I'd be a fire and brimstone Christian, because, I mean, how could you take it lightly? I mean, it would have to be something like, holy shit, like the creator of the universe gave us these laws. And I mean, it would be like, that's a huge deal. So I don't see how anybody couldn't be fire and brimstone. But I just think the whole thing is so silly.
Yeah, what puzzles me is within the atheist movement, there still seems to be, and I'm a card-carrying atheist, but there still seems to me a tendency towards a religious type of thinking. So in the case of
100%.
And I don't mean to pick on
even atheism is a religion, but is become a religion. Don't mean to pick on
just the reasoning method. So because there is this need to counter the idea that moral realism doesn't need to come from. And granted, the Christians are moral realists. They say there's a definite right and there's a definite wrong. Fair enough. And so we want to preserve that. But the way in which many atheists try and get there is by recreating a kind of religious morality based upon a foundation. The Christians have God, but let's get rid of God. We'll have a different foundation.
Yeah, correct.
And the Popperian view of this is you need no such foundation in morality any more than you do in physics. What you do is you encounter problems and you solve the problems as they come to you. And you create this web of knowledge which captures solutions.
Hold on before you go any further, because I realized I didn't answer your question about brain scans. But now we've gotten back to this explanation. But you need a value system because you need to know whether or not you should spend time on a problem or whether or not, like you would need to import your values like human flourishing. You need some value. I mean, maybe this value is to just waste everybody's time.
Yes, but that's a very different claim, and I'm all for values. I'm all for having moral explanations. What I'm saying is that the view of the religious person and the Christian is typically to say that moral value is incontrovertible. There's no possible way I could be wrong about this. I cannot improve upon the word of God.
Right.
And some people who want to replace the God idea, they do the same thing by saying, here is my incontrovertible thing. For example, there's nothing worse than the worst possible suffering for everyone. I need to have almost like Archimedes' pivot point. I need this one immovable spot. And if I don't have that, then suddenly I'm a relativist. And I would deny that move, that you can have values, you can have objective moral values which you will defend with your life without them needing to be infallible. And it's the move towards infallibility and dogmatism that I would resist.
Okay, so you do understand, however, the appeal of that, right?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if you have that, if you have a strong basis upon which to rest, it's easy to build a structure of morality. It's easier to build a framework for that morality. So I'm extremely sympathetic to that project, to foundationalism. I'm also extremely sympathetic to coherentism, the idea that the propositions cohere in a kind of network of belief. And if, one node is removed, then like the brain, the synapses the propositions will still cover it. So you don't need some kind of apodictic truth, some kind of immutable, unshakable truth. I'm sympathetic to that, but I also think largely the project has been overthought. So actually, I know you're supposed to ask me questions, but I have a question for you. Do you think they're moral facts? Just short answer.
Yes.
Okay. In computers, I think it's like the go to solve something. What is it, 73 or like it just the computer solves something, and it's solved like how to mate with 3 pieces that people have been working on for hundreds of years, and they thought it's not possible, and then they changed the rules of the game. I'm only mentioning that as a point of contact. Do you think it's possible that there are moral facts and that there are things that our meat brains, to borrow a term from Mick Bostrom, can't figure out? I know you're not a Bostrom fan, but that AGI or some level of advanced, sophisticated AI will...
No, for all the reasons I said earlier, our brains are universal. And so in the same way that the next highest prime number yet to be computed really exists. It has a real existence. Anyone can go to Wikipedia or go to Grok and ask, what is the currently highest known prime number? And they'll get an answer. Now, we know there are an infinite number of primes. So all those other primes that haven't yet been found,
I don't know, okay.
Really, that's old proof. So there's all these other prime numbers yet to be, an infinite number of more prime numbers yet to be found, yet to be written down, but they exist. Now, in what sense do they exist? Well, we have to create the knowledge of them to discover where they are. And I think of moral facts like that we can come to understand them more over time. They really exist. Now, you might say, in what sense they exist or where do they exist? I think that's the wrong question to say, where do they exist? It's asking for a space, but we're talking abstract moral space. And as we improve, as we make progress, we will come to understand morality ever better, and we'll have different moral problems, and therefore we'll need different moral values.
Okay, so here's the Christian apologist, not universally, but this is the response to that. You're talking about pragmatism, not morality. You're talking about how to solve dental pain or something. So you're not really talking about moral problems, you're talking about practical problems.
I call any question about what to do next a moral problem, because it's not a fact of what is, it's a should.
Yeah. So when the apologists say you're just thinking about, well, I guess that they would also say, and I'm making some inferences here, but they would also say, how do you know the initial shoulds? Like, how do you know what you should do?
The same way I know anything else, whether it be in science, mathematics, or anywhere else, conjecturally. It's the best idea or the best understanding I have at the moment. It could be flawed. It could always be flawed.
And I think that idea of it could always be flawed is one of epistemic humility. And it's fascinating to me that many people who claim to possess eternal, timeless truths claim also that there's a humility in that. But it seems like it's just the opposite.
Yes.
The thing that I was thinking about for a while is that it's almost inverted. People have it wrong. It's not that because your life is going to end, it has no purpose. Living eternally by God, the right hand of the Father, or what have you, that would seem to demean the life we have now. That would seem to make this whole thing less purposeful. it's because my life is limited. As I get older, it's more limited. Unfortunately, it's because it's limited right now. It has a kind of built-in expiration date, if you will, that is what gives my life meaning.
Yeah, and solving problems. If you're at the right hand of the Father forever, that seems like a permanent state of stasis.
Yeah.
Nothing changes. Everything's the same day after day. It seems less like heaven and more like hell.
Yeah.
One wants to change. One wants to encounter newness, novelty, difference,
I wouldn't, I said to someone on a plane who was a hardcore Christian, and I said, would you want eternity? And I said, no. He just couldn't believe it. He's like, he was just flabbergasted about it. I mean, I think eternity would be hell. Like, if you really thought about an eternal life, it would be hell.
I'm happy to have an unbounded life, not to know when it's going to end and potentially just keep on extending it every year. They say, do you want to extend it by a year? Yep, like signing a contract.
I'll
have another 10 years. I'll have another 10 years.
Yeah.
Once you get bored, okay, you can off yourself. But if that's an option,
I don't see that ever happening. Like, yeah, and then you remember the Highlander, the show where it always was fascinating to me. Like, what if an asteroid came and blew up the planet and those guys were just like floating around in space for eternity? Like, that would be hell to me. Like, that would be really. I remember there was an episode where a guy, he was a Nazi. Someone locked him in a box and put it in a deep river, and he woke up and died every day, multiple times a day for 80 years or something crazy. But I think it would be horrific to live forever. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe there's this weird kind of, or maybe it's not weird, maybe it's just a human instinct to want to preserve the self and to see the preservation of the self long beyond the body as a way to sustain, as a kind of structure-imposing mechanism on the society so that you can make sense of things and just don't freak out. Like, oh my God, I'm going to die, I'm freaking out. But actually, it doesn't bother me at all. I just don't want to, like I saw my parents die of cancer. Like, that's just not how I want to go down. I'm just going to blow my head off if that happens. I've actually thought about the whole thing. I'm just going to...
Don't leave a mess. I mean,
I have a place where I have a place I know where I'm going to go, where no one goes, and I can do that. No one will ever find my body either. But I think that the point is, like, it's not the death that I mind. It's just like, I know cancer is like a master torturer, and my mom in particular, her death was just ghastly. She had cancer. It was both of my parents, and I'm not going down like that. So it's not the death that bothers me. I don't know. I don't know why. I think people really do have some kind of need to just believe.
Yes.
I mean, if it's not God, we create idols, we create gods, we put bigotry as the worst possible thing, or racism as and once that idiocy dies down, it'll be something. Yeah, I mean, don't be a dick, don't be a racist, But I mean, I just think that, and the more I've thought about this, it seems that every epoch, many people have written about this, but every epoch has certain values that govern the age. I've talked about this before. Homer, it was strength, and Voltaire was humor, and Aristotle was the Athenian gentleman, and it goes on, and there'll be just something else. But I'm, maybe this is not where you want to go with it, but I'm increasingly convinced not only do we not have free will, but the things that people choose to believe at a rudimentary level are beyond their capacity. And it's very, very difficult to train them out of it. This interview I did with Mia Hughes was very profound to me. She's talking about social contagions. And at first there was a social contagion among girls of cutting, I think bulimia, then cutting, now transing. Of course, this is far worse. But even the way that you call out you're in distress and you tell people you're in distress is itself a social contagion. And it's very difficult to train people out of certain kinds of fallacies like my side bias or, my side is always right. But I think that there's a very complex interplay, a dance, if you will, between morality, community, and beliefs.
Let's sit on that for a moment. Belief is really where I wanted to actually get to, because you use the word a lot, and the very few people that actually watch both of our channels will notice that the language you use is often couched in terms of believe or belief, and mine is know and knowledge. And knowledge, following David Deutsch, who follows Karl Popper, is information that is useful or information that has causal power. It's also information that tends to get itself copied over time. It needs to be, the fancy word is instantiated, that just means represented in some sort of substrate inside of matter. And so books can contain knowledge. The genome contains knowledge. A telescope contains knowledge. Minds contain knowledge. Now, once you have this view of information as being useful or useless, the useful stuff being knowledge, which is what our minds contain, the word belief and believe tends to leave your vocabulary altogether because it becomes superfluous to any needs. In fact, what I've found in looking at the way that people use it, sort of just having a scientific view of the language, the word believe can tend to mean two diametrically opposed things to people. For example, a religious person who says, I believe in God, is telling you that with the highest confidence, this is a thing that exists. But on the other hand, you know, if you're wandering around the house going, where's my keys? I can't find my keys. And your partner yells from the other room, I believe it on the counter. They don't necessarily mean they're 100% certain. In fact, the opposite to certain. They're indicating uncertainty. So believe.
Yeah, that's right. Believe is no. I think that's absolutely right. And the idea there is belief. I just talking to Rita about this. Belief isn't binary. It's not on off. It's not 1-0. There are degrees of confidence. That's why when we do the spectrum street epistemology, we put them on mats. But I think it's really, really helpful as an applied epistemology, practical on a practical level for people, to talk about how confident they are in their beliefs and if they've calibrated what they think they know. Now I'm going to roam into your territory. And again, I'm taking a basic theaetetus as justified true belief. I think it's extremely helpful to help people clarify their epistemology when they think in terms of, oh, wow, I believe this. How sure am I about this? Do I have evidence for this? Am I willing? Is it defeasible? Am I willing to change my mind? So I think it's a kind of a strategy to help people live better lives, to think like that.
And I think street epistemology is great, but again, you just mentioned justified true belief.
Yeah, so nothing before the butt matters. I think that was Tywin Lannister's thing. Yeah.
I like the binary. I like asking people if they know something, because then it's a binary. You either know it or you don't know it. And then your confidence and all the other stuff is utterly irrelevant to any project or any interesting question. So do you think knowledge is actually justified true belief, or...
Yeah, so before I say that, let me go back to what you just said. So many people won't claim moral knowledge, they'll claim moral beliefs. And if you look at the Socratic dialogues, they're all like, what is X? Wisdom begins in wonder, famously. I did my whole dissertation, I did that when I went into the prisons, and I just pulled, what is justice, what is it? And I would ask people that, and people will give you, they won't say that they know those things. They'll tell you that they believe them. And there's a difference.
What do you think the difference is? What's going on in their head?
I think the difference is, like, if someone tells you, I think it's true, maybe we can have a talk about doxastic volunteerism, the idea that you can will yourself to change your beliefs. I think, or can you knowingly believe things that aren't true? I think the way people think about problems is very different. If they say, I believe X, I think X. We started talking about religion. I trust X. I have confidence in X. I have faith in X. So I personally, and maybe this is another disagreement, I think it's really important the words you use because they show what's behind the thinking. And so when people use believe, that's usually pretty strong. It's stronger than think. Now, in Australia, and it always rubs me the wrong way, New Zealand, actually England too, people say, I reckon.
Yeah.
Like we don't, like only inbreds in the South say that. Like no offense, Reed, he's from the South. But, like seriously, like people who have sex with their sisters and they drink like, stilled whiskey or something say, I reckon. Yeah. So it's a little disconcerting every time I hear it. But so that's another kind of way to qualify. But I think that the difference between I believe and I know is very different. And one of the reasons, again, I think it's incredibly helpful to people to not talk about what they know, but to talk about what they believe.
But, okay, I know how to ride a bike. That's clearly something people would routinely say. They wouldn't say, I believe how to ride a bike.
Correct.
And so that indicates knowledge, which is fallible. They could fall off the bike. They could hit a speed bump and, anything could go wrong to indicate that, in fact, their capacity to ride the bike isn't perfect.
Well, that's the other thing. That's Dan Dennett's belief in belief. And the idea that, one of the reasons that certain, I don't know, you can frame it as memes, you can frame it as certain beliefs. People have belief in belief. They believe that it's a good thing to have these beliefs. Yes. But no one has belief in, I shouldn't say no one, there's always some outlier out there, but no one has kind of belief in like thinking about certain things. Now, you could have a belief in a way of thinking about certain things like falsifiability or a kind of epistemological rigor or epistemic hygiene more broadly, thinking of epistemic adequacy. But when I think that's the other pitfall or that's the important thing about helping people to think about their beliefs, because you are helping them to think about their thoughts. But when you talk about beliefs, you're also talking about morality.
What if I tell you that I have, or at least aim to have, zero beliefs? I know things, I know a bunch of things, and there's a whole bunch of things I don't know, but at no point of any of the claims I would make about things that I know would I say I believe any of them. I think it was Faraday who said, I hold my theories on the tips of my fingers so the merest fact could cause them to blow away. So he don't believe your theories, in other words.
I wouldn't believe you. So I just use belief there, and that's a legitimate use of belief. If, Reed told you at midnight he turns into a werewolf, you wouldn't believe him. You wouldn't, I assume you wouldn't believe him. You wouldn't just say, I know that's not true.
No, I would say, I know that's not true. I would.
But undergirding that,
I wouldn't say...
You would believe that that's not true.
No, because I don't think the word belief corresponds to anything in physical reality. So when someone says that
I don't
believe,
think it does either.
Yeah, so, but when people say stuff, it's coming from their mind. So it's represented in their brain in some way.
Yeah.
And if it is represented in their brain some way, that constitutes knowledge. The knowledge may be false, but they will still know it. On the other hand, belief isn't a structure that is represented in the mind, unless, if and only if, it is identical to knowledge. In other words, it is a representation because, as I say, all knowledge is information that is represented in a physical substrate somewhere.
So maybe I'm making a wild inference, but are you saying that the linguistic infrastructure that we use, it's easier to use the word belief than it is to use the word knowledge, and we'd all be better off if we had a different linguistic structure and we just switch from believing to know?
I think the man on the street, the common sense use of the word know, is not what not including you in the basket necessarily, the professional philosophers tend to think of the word as being used.
I'm not in the basket.
Because I often say things like, I don't know, I know that the electron is a particle, let's say.
Yeah.
And then people will come back and say, oh, do you really know? So what they want is, they think that by know, it means am certain that. But that's never what I mean. I mean, I have an explanation. That's what to know means. So if I have an explanation for something, I'm happy to say I know it. Now, that's very different again to saying, I believe the electron is a particle. I don't believe the electron is a particle. I have no emotion attached to this theory. It's just that I know the theory, and I know the theory could be wrong, and therefore I'm not willing to believe it, not willing to say I know that it's true, which is usually what belief means, knowing something is true. I don't know that any of this stuff is true. I know it tracks reality to some extent, but will also contain misconception.
Can you know something and not believe it?
But that's my whole point. I don't have any beliefs. Yes, so for example, I know Newton's law of gravity. That's a simple formula, F equals G m1 m2 over r squared. I know it. I also know it's false. So therefore I don't believe it, and I shouldn't believe it because I know it's false. But why do I know it? Because I learnt it in high school and I taught it and so on and so forth. I can even use it. I know that it's false, so it's not justified, it's not true, and it's not a belief, and yet it's knowledge.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm trying not to take it down to the meta level, but even if I did take it down to the meta level, your claim would be you still don't need belief. So you could say, I know that's not true. You wouldn't have to say, I believe that I know that's not true.
I don't need to get into an infinite regress. I can just say, I have an explanation. I understand the explanation, hence I know it. And sometimes not even have an explicit explanation, like riding the bike. I can't write down a recipe for how to ride a bike and faithfully pass it on, but I know how to do. There's a whole bunch of things I know that are inexplicit.
Okay. So then you can't think of an example of when you know something and you don't believe it.
Again, I take the word belief. It doesn't form a part of my epistemology whatsoever. As I follow Popper in this, who said he's not a philosopher of belief. I take a step further because you actually read Popper's works and he uses the word believe now and again. And I think, well, I thought you weren't endorsing belief. So I just know stuff. I don't believe because to me,
or you think you know stuff.
I know stuff. No, just full stop. Because I think you're still coming from a position that if you use the word know, it must indicate that I know it's true.
Yeah, that's right.
As I've just said,
there's a component there of built into that.
But that can't be the case because, as I just said, with Newton's theory of gravity, we know full well it is false. It's absolutely false. But it is an approximation to reality. It works reasonably well sometimes, but it's going to fail spectacularly, for example, when trying to predict the behaviour of black holes or something like that. But in order to predict how long it will take if I drop this for it to hit the ground, it'll do a reasonable job. But I don't believe it because I know that it's not true. And there's many such things like this. I can give you an account of Lamarckism. I know the theory of Lamarckism, but simultaneously I know it's false, I know it's unjustified, and no one should believe it. And a lot of our knowledge is like this. In fact, in the final analysis, all of our knowledge will turn out to contain error and misconception. Therefore, we should believe none of it.
Okay, so and correct me if this is incorrect. What it would take for you to change your mind is if I could give you an example of when one would have to use the word belief in which the word no wouldn't suffice.
Okay.
No, I'm asking.
Oh, yeah, if you could persuade me that there's a necessity for me to use the word believe, or that
or not
concept
even not even necessity or required, but it's just a better word. It just does more work. It's just a.
When I want to express uncertainty, which is quite often, in other words, I don't know something, but I have a sort of an emotional feeling that maybe, if I was going to put money down, I tend to use the word reckon, think, guess, rather than I believe. Because again, believe has that ambiguity of, are you saying you believe like the Christian believes in God, or are you saying believe like, I believe tomorrow it's going to be raining? An expression of either certainty or uncertainty. It doesn't help to say, I believe X, when you could say, I know X, I know it's going to rain tomorrow, or I don't know. And people actually, when pressed, they fall into one of those two buckets on every issue, I would say, because they will know something insofar as they can explain it.
Right.
Sometimes not. Sometimes there will be an inexplicit explanation. They'll say, I know it, but I can't tell you why. Okay, fair enough, that will happen.
Well, then what do you do? What is I don't believe that? So what do you say? I don't know that? Like if I say to you, there's a bunch of mutant large, crazy large marauding turtles, you would just say, I don't know that?
It sounds like bullshit.
But you
There's a whole
say,
bunch of ways I could say I could reject that idea.
You say,
but of course, yeah. Okay, so coming down to linguistics, I could say that, and I think it's fine to say that, and I'm fully with Popper that there's no point debating terminology ultimately. It's just that I don't think it's part of a rigorous epistemology.
Yeah, but so what if I say to you like, that this is not true, just so you know, but like, you just drank, your coffee was not made with water, it was made with LSD. Yeah.
Why do you think that, Peter? How do you know that?
Yeah, well, because I bought the LSD and I stuck it in the coffee.
Why would you do that, Peter?
I know, but you wouldn't say I don't know that. You would say I don't believe that. Or arsenic, you'd say I don't believe that, you and Reed would do that to me,
absolutely,
right?
Yeah, I could say that. I personally I wouldn't say that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. I would say I doubt it, or no, you didn't.
No, you didn't. But ultimately, those are not knowledge states; those are belief states.
No, they're knowledge states.
How are they not?
Because there's no good explanation that would lead me to think that you would actually put LSD there. I have no reason to think.
Your trust in me is unbounded.
It would be a bad explanation. How long does LSD take to come on?
I don't know.
The walls aren't melting
25
yet.
minutes. I don't know. Okay, so there's because I was trying to think if you negated belief, like.
I can see where you're coming from. You're saying, well, I'm just sort of, to some extent, it seems as if what I'm doing is just trying to arbitrarily not use the word belief or believe, and I'm playing a language game. Really what I'm trying to do is to tease out the differences between us in epistemology.
Yeah.
Do you need belief in your epistemology? Because epistemology to me is an understanding of what knowledge is, how it grows and flourishes, how progress works. All of that stuff is under the umbrella of epistemology. But where does belief come into that?
Yeah,
Why is it relevant?
That's super interesting because I wouldn't say I believe in my epistemology.
That's I don't believe in mine either.
Yeah.
I don't believe it, I have no beliefs.
Yeah. But I mean, you have to have, I guess I'm trying to think if you could really make a substitution, a one-to-one universal substitution, you walk across the street, you don't say, I believe if I get hit with the car, it'll hurt. You say, I know the car.
Oh, yes.
So I wonder if you could make a one-to-one substitution and just obviate the need entirely.
I think you can, and it has the advantage, as I say, of comporting with our understanding of physics really well. Because as I say, physics teaches us that information is physical. It has to be represented somewhere. And of all the information that exists, some of it's useless and you need to discard it, but of the information that we want to keep, that's valuable, that we copy from generation to generation, or that we tell each other, that's knowledge. And so that links physics to epistemology via the route of knowledge. But belief, it's something different insofar as it exists at all, and I don't think that it does. It seems to separate itself out from the potential of actually one day being incorporated into a scientific understanding of epistemology.
I can totally see that. It reminds me of that story in Hungary that I told that you said like a real-life Gettier problem or something.
Ah, yeah.
When I went into the wrong venue that was called the Scruton Cafe. They had a guy by the name of Peter. I went down. He said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Peter." I sat in his chair. Do you speak Hungarian? No. Well, the event is Hungarian. That's okay. You can get a translator. I mean, all this stuff. And it was the wrong venue. So I believe, so this is, I'm only bringing that up because I'm thinking it's actually a 100% true story. The thing I forgot to say is that the name of the venue is the same too, which was even more traction. But I would have said, if you asked me, I believe I'm in the right venue. In fact, I'm like, of course I'm right in the venue, I believe. But I guess I could have said, I know that I'm in the right venue. But to me, there's just something off about saying no there. Like, there's a kind of, go ahead.
Because you think, and I think people have been taught that this word know means certain that or must be true that, whereas a lot of what we know just isn't so. So we can know things, but it's false.
Yeah, and so I would say don't say you know it.
But
don't claim to know it.
That's Plato's baggage that we are inheriting, and we can fly free of that. We can be more Socratic about what our knowledge is, and just say we can question it all. It's all doubtful. It's all fallible. And the word "no" doesn't need to be held up in this religious way, because it's almost a religious standard for know and knowledge. Because you'll never be satisfied. I
can understand it, and I think there's no but. And I think that there is a kind of, it's a way to gauge someone's certainty.
Again, that's not part of my, I don't like, you could say, I thought I was in the right venue.
Yeah, maybe I do more street stuff, maybe I just have a different ambition. I mean, I don't know. I guess, so then the question is, should I eschew that in my life? Should I just move to knowing and not believing?
Another issue is, perhaps, because I think your epistemology and approach is highly psychological. It's very much about what's going on in people's minds.
True.
No problem. Fair enough.
True.
But
it has to be. Yeah.
Epistemology in the Popperian and broader sense is partly that, but that's only a small aspect of what knowledge is about. Knowledge is about, as I say, information with causal power. It is the explanation for why wealth increases. It is the explanation as to... When I say things like, in a telescope, we instantiate the knowledge of how to collect and focus light. The telescope contains knowledge. It contains knowledge of how to generate images of distant objects and that kind of thing. But that doesn't form part of an epistemology that is based upon belief, because the telescope has no beliefs. A book has no beliefs, yet they contain knowledge. So therefore, how could knowledge possibly be justified true belief when those knowledge-containing entities cannot possibly have beliefs?
Yeah, it's well taken. And why do you think that this difference is important? Why is this important?
I'm really interested in rationality.
Yeah,
I'm really,
me too.
Rationality to me is the capacity to detect and correct error.
Yeah.
And pursuing that requires us to focus on knowledge, because with knowledge, we always assume there's going to be errors. But with beliefs, insofar as people are going to adhere to this, what I would call religious or at least quasi-religious idea of belief, it can become dogmatic. And once a person becomes dogmatic about certain beliefs or claims they believe a certain thing, then there is no way of them admitting there could be error there. There's no way of them being rational.
So for you, it's psychological as well.
Well, it can be, but as I say, my broader concern is what I would increasingly call the physics of epistemology, the way in which knowledge can be represented, the way in which knowledge grows broadly, whether inside minds or outside of minds. Popper has this wonderful paper called Knowledge Without a Knower, and it explains this idea that yes, people generate knowledge, people are the most important entities in the universe precisely because they can create explanatory knowledge and change the world around them. But at no point do we need to believe any of our knowledge. And I think belief leads, or at least people who endorse the idea of belief, can open the door to dogmatism, because dogmatism is just a form of belief. Whereas if we all endorse, rather, an idea of fallible knowledge, we close the door to dogmatism, because we always assume that any of our utterances, any of the things that we think could be wrong. And that's why it's important, because civilizationally, one of the greatest threats is, of course, dogma. People who claim to believe what, in fact, the rest of us know just isn't true.
Brett Hall, thank you very much.